My wife shamed me over pleasing women at a barbecue. I struck back hard, took back self-respect, and pushed my toxic marriage to face truth. The words I said that night at the barbecue destroyed my marriage in front of 20 people. And honestly, I'd say every single one again. But for those words to make any sense, you need to understand how we got there. For 6 years, I'd slowly become less of a husband and more of a walking apology, a domestic servant in my own home. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry, paid bills, grocery shopped, fixed everything around the house. And for all that, all I ever got was a constant stream of criticism, always for not doing it fast enough, or well enough. The respect in our marriage had just slowly bled out, almost unnoticed, until one day I woke up and realized it was completely gone. It was always some little thing. My cooking was bland, I forgot her favorite creamer, I loaded the dishwasher wrong. And every time, I'd just apologize, promise to do better. I thought that's what a good husband did, right? Keep the peace, make her happy, don't rock the boat. I was the guy who said sorry before I even knew what I was apologizing for, just to make the argument stop. Looking back? Yeah, it was pathetic. But back then, it was just my normal. It had been for so long. So, that fateful Sunday, we were at Ethan and Olivia's place, a nice couple 3 houses down. They'd invited maybe 10 couples over for a classic backyard barbecue. The weather was perfect, that late summer evening air, finally cooling down, smelling like charcoal and fresh-cut grass. I was actually looking forward to it. My wife had been in a decent mood all week, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, we could have one of those normal, pleasant evenings, like real couples do. I was chatting football with a few of the guys when I heard laughter from across the deck. My wife was over there, with a group of women and a couple of other husbands. Someone had made a joke about keeping romance alive in a marriage, you know, that typical suburban small talk that sounds profound after a few beers but is really just noise. I wasn't really listening until my wife's voice cut through the air. Loud. Clear. Dripping with that specific tone she always used when she was about to drop some clever bomb. And then she said it. I'll never, ever forget her exact words. Maybe my husband should take a class on how to satisfy a woman. You know what I mean? The laughter that followed? It wasn't the good kind. It was that choked, uncomfortable sound where everyone suddenly stares at their shoes, not knowing whether to laugh or just cringe. Every single eye on that deck pivoted to me. The burger in my mouth turned to cement. The humiliation was immediate, complete. My wife. The person who was supposed to have my back, my partner. Publicly mocking our intimate life to our neighbors. These were people I'd run into at the grocery store, their kids went to school with the kids on our street. People I'd be making awkward small talk with for years. And she just threw me under the bus for a cheap laugh. My face was on fire. And that old, familiar voice screamed in my head, *apologize. Laugh it off. Change the subject. Don't make waves, *, but this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the beer. Maybe it was the brutal week I'd had at work. Or maybe, just maybe, 6 years of disrespect had finally filled my tank to absolute overflowing. Instead of shrinking, instead of playing along, something cold and startlingly clear just settled over me. I looked straight at her. And in the exact same casual, conversational tone she'd just used, I said, "That's pretty funny coming from someone who's as dry as toast and dead as a wall." The deck went absolutely silent. Like someone had hit a mute button on the entire universe. My wife's smug satisfaction evaporated into pure, jaw-dropping shock in about half a second. And I wasn't done. I kept my voice just as calm. "But hey, you're definitely an expert at satisfaction, considering you spend every single evening satisfying yourself by scrolling through your phone." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone coughed. A beer bottle clinked against the railing. Ethan looked like he wanted to phase through the deck into another dimension. My wife's face, already red, turned crimson. And I saw tears forming in her eyes, not sad tears, but furious, humiliated tears. She stood there for maybe 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, then just bolted. Ran into Ethan and Olivia's house. I heard a door slam somewhere inside. Olivia shot me a look, half horror, half something like impressed awe, then followed her. The guys around me didn't know what to do. One of them clapped me on the shoulder and mumbled something about needing another beer. The party kind of awkwardly sputtered back to life, around me, at half volume. About 10 minutes later, she stormed back out, face blotchy, eyes red. She marched right up to me and hissed, "We're leaving. Now." I took a slow sip of my beer, met her glare, and said, "I'm not ready to leave yet." She actually stammered, like her brain couldn't compute the word no coming from me. She demanded again, her voice getting shriller, and I just repeated that I was staying. "You're welcome to walk home if you want," I added. "It's only 3 blocks. The disbelief on her face was absolute, like I'd just started speaking ancient Greek. She just stood there for a moment, probably waiting for me to crack, to apologize, like I always had. But I just turned back to Ethan, picking up our conversation about the upcoming football season. Eventually, she stomped off. A few minutes later, I heard our car start up in the driveway. I stayed for another hour. Finished my beer, had a burger, made small talk with guys who were clearly dying to ask what the hell had just happened, but were too polite to bring it up. When I finally walked home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The house was dark, except for the upstairs bedroom light, and I could hear her pacing, working herself into a full rage. I made myself a sandwich, grabbed another beer, and settled on the couch, watching highlights on my phone. Eventually, she descended like a storm system. The fight that followed was nuclear. She called me cruel. She called me abusive. Said I'd humiliated her, ruined her reputation, made everyone think she was a terrible wife. I let her rant for a while. When she finally paused, gasping for breath, I asked one simple question: "Do you think what you said about me was kind?" She stuttered, mumbled something about it being just a joke. I told her I'd been the punchline of her jokes for 6 years now. Criticized, belittled, mocked, dismissed, in private, and now, apparently, in public too. I was done pretending it didn't bother me. Something fundamental shifted in me that night. The old me, the guy who would have apologized all the way home, spent the next week trying to make it up to her. That guy was gone. In his place was someone who finally remembered he deserved basic respect. That marriage was a partnership, not a hostage situation. She waited for me to crack, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness like always. I just went to bed. The next morning, she probably expected me to come crawling back with apologies and flowers. Instead, I made myself coffee, just 1 cup, and watched the sunrise. From our back porch. She came out eventually, still in her pajamas, looking exhausted and confused. She asked if we were going to talk about what happened. I told her we could talk when she was ready to acknowledge what she'd done, not just my reaction to it. She hated that answer. She wanted me to be sorry first, to admit I'd crossed a line, to revert to the guy who absorbed all her crap with a smile. But that guy was dead. And I felt nothing but profound relief at his passing. I finished my coffee, told her I was going to the gym, and left her standing there on the porch, looking like her entire world had just tilted sideways. Because it had. The real fun started Monday morning. I made exactly 1 cup of coffee. Not a pot, not enough for 2, just a single cup in my travel mug for work. My wife came downstairs, expecting her usual routine: coffee ready, breakfast made, lunch packed, just like I'd done for 6 years. Instead, she found an empty pot and me walking out the door. She called after me, asking where her coffee was. I just said, I made mine, and left. I heard her yelling something as I backed out of the driveway, but honestly, I'd already mentally checked out of caring what she needed from me. That evening, I stopped at the gym on my way home, something I hadn't done in years because I'd always rushed back to start dinner. I spent an hour there, took my time showering, and didn't get home until almost 7. When I walked in, my wife was in the kitchen, looking frustrated and hungry. She asked when dinner would be ready. I told her I'd already had a protein bar after my workout, I wasn't hungry, so she should make whatever she wanted. The look on her face was priceless, like I'd just told her the sky was green. She asked if I was serious. Completely serious, I said, and went upstairs to change. Over the next few days, I systematically stopped doing everything for her. My laundry? Done. Hers? Still in the basket. I bought groceries just for me, cooked meals for one. I cleaned my dishes, leaving hers in the sink. I paid the bills in my name and told her she needed to handle her car payment and phone bill herself. This wasn't about being petty, though I know it probably looked that way. It was about firmly establishing that I was no longer going to be her household servant while being treated like garbage. My wife tried everything to drag me back into the old pattern. First, sarcasm. Comments about how nice it must be to only think about yourself. I just smiled and agreed, actually, it is pretty nice. Then, she tried to pick fights. Leaving dirty dishes right where I was sitting, moving her laundry basket in front of my bedroom door. I just moved them, went about my day. She even tried the silent treatment for about 48 hours. But honestly, that just made the house quieter, more peaceful. That backfired spectacularly. The breaking point came about a week into my new routine. She opened her closet and discovered she had no clean clothes left. She came downstairs, where I was making breakfast, and in this tight, controlled voice, asked why none of her clothes were clean. I didn't even look up from my eggs. I just told her, I do my laundry Wednesdays and Saturdays. You're welcome to use the machine whenever you want. She actually said she didn't know how to use it, probably the most honest thing she'd said in months. I suggested she check YouTube for tutorials, since that's how I'd learned to cook half the meals I'd made for her all these years. That night, I came home to a kitchen full of smoke. My wife stood over a pot of burnt pasta, black, stuck to the bottom. She tried to make dinner for herself and apparently forgotten you need to stir pasta, and maybe not cook it on high heat for 45 minutes. I opened windows, turned off the stove, and made myself a sandwich while she looked like she might cry. She asked if I was really not going to help her. I asked her why she thought she needed help making pasta when she'd been perfectly capable of criticizing how I made it for years. That pretty much ended that conversation. The laundry situation escalated when she actually tried to wash her clothes herself. She somehow turned all her whites pink because she'd thrown in a red shirt without checking. She called me at work, actually interrupting my day, to ask what she did wrong. I told her I was busy, and she'd have to figure it out herself. My coworker, overhearing, gave me this knowing nod, like he'd been exactly there at some point in his own life. Over the next couple of weeks, my wife's frustration just grew exponentially. She was finally realizing how much I'd been doing, and how little she knew about running a household. She couldn't figure out which cleaning products went where, didn't know when bills were due, couldn't meal prep or grocery shop efficiently. She definitely couldn't maintain any kind of routine without someone else doing all the mental labor. Then, of course, her mother-in-law got involved. I came home one evening to find my mother-in-law sitting in our living room with my wife, both of them glaring at me like I was the defendant in a trial. Her mom immediately launched into a speech about how disappointed she was in me, how marriage was about partnership and sacrifice, how her daughter deserved better than my childish behavior. I let her finish the entire speech. Then, very calmly, I asked her, "Did you raise your daughter to treat her husband like a maid?" That stopped her mid-sentence. I continued, "Did you teach her it's okay to publicly humiliate her spouse, to contribute nothing to the household, to show zero appreciation for everything done for her?" My mother-in-law started to sputter about how marriage was complicated. I agreed completely. "It's very complicated," I said. "Which is why I'm simplifying it, by only being responsible for myself going forward." I asked her, "Who paid the mortgage? Who bought groceries? Cooked every meal? Did every load of laundry? Cleaned every surface? Scheduled every appointment? And who got mocked for all of it? My wife was staring at the floor. Her mother had gone silent. I told them both I'd spent 6 years trying to be good enough, trying to anticipate every need, prevent every criticism. And all it got me was a wife who thought so little of me, she'd mock our intimate life at a neighborhood barbecue. My mother-in-law didn't have much to say after that. She left pretty quickly. But the real intervention came 2 days later. My wife's entire family showed up at our house, her mom, her dad, her sister, even her brother, who I'd met maybe 3 times. All of them sitting in my living room, like an ambush. They wanted to talk about my behavior, how I was destroying my marriage, how I needed to be more understanding and compassionate. I listened for maybe 5 minutes. Then I stopped them. "We're going to do something different," I said. I turned to my wife. "Repeat what you said at the barbecue, word for word, in front of your family." She refused, said it wasn't relevant. I insisted. I told her family, if they truly wanted to understand why things had changed, they needed to hear what started it all. My wife finally mumbled something close to her words, and I watched her father's face. It just changed, as he processed his daughter publicly mocking her husband's bedroom performance to their neighbors. Then I asked my wife to tell her family what she contributed to our household. Specifically, with details. The silence was deafening. Her sister tried to jump in with something about emotional support. I asked, when exactly did that emotional support happen? Because I must have missed it between the criticisms, the eye-rolling, and the general contempt. I asked my wife when she'd last cooked me a meal, done anything thoughtful for me, shown any appreciation, or treated me like someone she actually liked, instead of someone she was just stuck with. She couldn't answer. Her family started to look incredibly uncomfortable. I then told them all something I'd been thinking about for days. I forgave her for the barbecue comment the moment it happened. Forgiveness is easy. But forgetting is impossible. And trust, once shattered, doesn't just magically repair itself. I told them I'd spent years making excuses for her behavior, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, she'd eventually appreciate me. But that night at the barbecue? It showed me that no amount of effort from me would ever be enough. The problem wasn't my performance. It was her profound lack of respect. Her father, to his credit, asked his daughter directly if what I was saying was true. She just started crying. Not answering, just crying. Her mother tried to comfort her, but her father stopped her. "Answer the question," he said. My wife finally admitted, "Yes, I did most of the housework. Yes, I paid for most things. Yes, she'd said something cruel at the barbecue, but claimed she didn't mean it the way it sounded." I asked her, "How, exactly, can you mean a comment like that in a good way?" She had no answer. Her family left shortly after. From their faces, I could tell that intervention had not gone as planned. My wife sat on the couch for a long time after they left. I made myself dinner, ate it alone at the table, cleaned my dishes, and went upstairs to read. She was still sitting there when I went to bed. And for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Because I'd finally stopped caring whether she approved of me or not. And that freedom? It was worth everything. Her breakdown started gradually, then suddenly, all at once. Like a dam cracking slowly before the whole structure collapses. She cycled through every stage of manipulation I'd seen over the years. But this time? None of them worked. I'd finally developed an immunity to her tactics. First came the tears. Not the furious ones from the barbecue, but those sad, desperate tears, designed to make me feel like a monster for standing my ground. She'd cry in the morning before work. Cry in the evening when I came home. Cry while I made my own dinner. I'd just hand her a tissue box and go back to what I was doing. Then came the bargaining. Suddenly she wanted therapy, wanted to work on us, wanted to start fresh and rebuild what we'd lost. The problem was, she wanted to rebuild it with me doing all the construction, while she supervised and criticized from the sidelines. Which was exactly the dynamic that had shattered us in the first place. When I told her I wasn't interested in couples therapy because I didn't see a couple worth saving, just two people who'd been living separate lives under the same roof for years, she looked at me like I'd slapped her. She asked what she could do, what I wanted from her. I told her the truth, nothing. Because I'd stopped expecting her to give me anything she wasn't capable of giving. That answer seemed to hit her harder than anything else I'd said. I think it was because she finally realized indifference was far, far worse than anger. The conversation that truly ended things happened on a Thursday night, about 3 weeks after the family intervention. I was reading on the back porch, something I'd been doing most evenings because the house felt suffocating. She came out and sat across from me. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She asked if we could really talk. Actually talk. Without me shutting down or walking away. I put my book down. I'm listening, I told her. She asked me point blank if what I'd said at the barbecue, the dry as toast comment, was truly how I felt. I looked at her for a long moment, then said, yes. It was true. But the real question, I told her, wasn't about our physical intimacy, or lack thereof. The real question was what I was willing to tolerate in my life going forward. She didn't understand. So I explained it in the simplest terms I could. I told her I'd spent 6 years trying to be enough for her. Trying to anticipate her needs, prevent her complaints, earn her respect through service and dedication. And it had gotten me exactly nowhere. I'd cooked thousands of meals that were always too salty or too bland or too something. I'd done thousands of loads of laundry that were folded wrong or sorted wrong or timed wrong. I'd cleaned a house that was never clean enough, paid bills I never paid early enough. I'd existed in a space where nothing I did mattered, because she'd already decided I was inadequate. The barbecue comment, I told her, wasn't the problem. It was just the precise moment I finally admitted to myself, this wasn't normal. This wasn't what marriage was supposed to feel like. And I deserved so much better than being someone's verbal punching bag and domestic servant. She started crying again, saying she didn't realize she'd been that bad, that she'd just been stressed and took it out on me, that she could change if I gave her a chance. I asked her why I should believe that, when she'd had 6 years of chances and only gotten worse. I told her that respect isn't something you can fake or force, it's either there, or it's not. And she clearly didn't respect me, not as a partner, not as a man, not even as a basic human being deserving of kindness. She protested, claiming she did respect me, that she loved me. I asked her, when was the last time you showed that love in any meaningful way? She couldn't answer. I told her love isn't just a feeling you claim to have. It's actions. Actions you consistently take. And her actions, for years, had shown me I was worth less to her than the phone she stared at every single evening. That hit her hard. She asked if there was any chance we could fix this. If I was willing to try. I looked at her and said the only thing I honestly could, I'm willing to see if you can become someone worthy of partnership. But I'm not going to wait around hoping for that transformation. I'm not going to coach you through basic human decency, and I'm definitely not going to accept breadcrumbs of effort while you expect a feast of gratitude. She asked what that meant, practically. I told her it meant she needed to figure out who she wanted to be as a person, not just as my wife. Because the version of herself she'd been showing me wasn't someone I wanted to spend my life with. The very last thing I said to her that night was the moment I knew I was completely free from whatever hold she'd had over me. She made one final attempt to turn things around, bringing up the barbecue again. Said maybe we both needed to learn to communicate better, how to satisfy each other's needs, trying to make it sound mutual, like we were equally responsible for the disaster our marriage had become. I actually smiled. And I told her something I'd been thinking about for days. You suggested I take a class on how to satisfy a woman. But over the past few weeks, I've actually taken a far more important class. A class on how to satisfy myself. How to set boundaries. How to recognize my own worth. How to stop seeking approval from someone who is never going to give it. And I passed that class with flying colors. I told her I'd learned I didn't need her permission to be happy. Didn't need her validation to feel valuable. And didn't need her approval to make decisions about my own life. For years, her comfort had been my absolute priority, while mine never even made the list. I was done with that arrangement. She just sat there, speechless. I picked my book back up and continued reading, like she wasn't even there. The weeks that followed were quiet. A kind of quiet our house had never known. My wife stopped trying to engage me in arguments, conversations, or manipulation. She started doing her own laundry, making her own meals, handling her own responsibilities. Like an actual adult. Sometimes, I'd catch her watching me, like she was seeing a stranger. And in a way, she was. Because the man who'd apologized for everything and absorbed all her contempt was completely gone. I didn't hate her. Didn't want revenge. Didn't even feel particularly angry anymore. I just felt nothing. And that nothing was the most peaceful thing I'd experienced in years. I'd wake up, make my coffee, go to the gym, go to work, come home, make my dinner, read my book, go to bed. All without once wondering if I was doing enough, or being enough, or trying enough. I'd stopped playing a game I could never win. And the relief of that was absolutely incredible. My wife had wanted me to take a course on satisfying women. But what I'd actually learned was infinitely more valuable. The only person's satisfaction I was truly responsible for was my own. That boundaries aren't cruel, they're absolutely essential. And that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept treatment that makes you feel utterly worthless. I sat on my porch one evening, beer in hand, watching the sunset, completely at peace with wherever my life went from there. Because for the first time in 6 years, I was living it for myself. What would you have done in my shoes?